Hello, viewer slash listener. Welcome to Break. This is Break for Fallthrough episode number 58. And it is Matt and myself here. We just talked about a lot less OpenClaw than I thought we talked about. But we did talk about, I think the conversation we had was a lot of fun. I like talking about the future and the new stuff we can do, and also explaining some of the current stuff with some more nuance. I think the future is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. Like I said, I wanted to talk more about OpenClaw, but I also don't want to perpetuate these sort of like trendy topics either. We're seeing it over and over and over again. Hey, this is the new thing. If you're not using this, you're going to be left behind. And then a week later, this sucks. I got my identity stolen. And It's like, what are you people doing? Like, honestly, what are you people doing at this point? It's a little frustrating to hear this, but people don't know. They're excited. They want to ride the wave because they don't want to miss out. So they do these things and they don't understand the fundamentals. And yeah, I don't know. Like, great. It's a AI agent that can connect to your messaging app. Good job. Like, not to diminish it, because I know someone spent no time writing it because they vibe coded it, but like, great, you had that kind of access already with like Claude Code on their paid plan or whatever. Do you really need to be talking to an AI thing all the time in your life, in your iMessages, in your Telegram, in your Slack, or whatever channels it supports? Like, do you really need to be always connected? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is showing that people do want, I think what people want is a nice little, they want an assistant. They want an assistant in the idea of like what an assistant, like a human that's an assistant that like just does a bunch of background stuff for you, like what they do. And it's like, that's not a bad thing. But again, like, A, you only want that assistant to do specific things. And B, it's probably better if we just had a system where you could do that locally instead of having to use APIs or subscriptions for all of that. But I do think that there's this thing that I've noticed where people get really excited and really get on the hype, but they also like don't go through the abstraction, right? Like a year ago, I was very like anti-AI. And I think a lot of the reason why I was like against most of it is because I was like, I don't really understand how this thing works, so I don't want to use something that I don't understand how it works. And from how everybody's talking, it does not seem like anybody that's in my circle knows how this stuff works, so I don't really know if I want to use this thing that nobody seems to know how it works. And then I think what changed is that, like, A, talking to people like Mitchell and Steve, but also like one of my other good friends, he's been using AI for like more of the automating your life stuff. So he used Copilot to automate like a bunch of like email templates and things like that. And like I've seen him also grow and start using it. But the thing between like with him and with Mitchell and Steve is that all of them are like, they're understanding how this system is working at a lower level. They're like interacting with and seeing like, oh, this is the stuff I'll use it for. This is the stuff I won't use it for. This is what I will trust. This is what I will not trust. It's a much more like nuanced view of things. And as I saw them using more and more of this, and like you and like so many other people like start using it and having nuanced views of it, then I was like, oh, maybe I should try this thing out. And then I started using it and then seeing it and developed my own nuanced opinion. And then kind of, I feel like immediately, right? I only started using a lot of the stuff back in November. So it's like pretty rapidly after that, it has become like, oh, now I'm digging into like the depths of this. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I want to build my own systems using like Zig and Llama CPP to be like as close to the metal as possible when it comes to running this stuff, because I want to have all of the nuance and have all of the power and all the tools at my disposal. I think there's too many people that get stuck in the space where they like don't get all of that nuance, but they just use the thing. And I think that's where the danger is. And I think that's where people keep getting stuck. I think that's also where you can kind of trick yourself into thinking that this thing is more than what it is, right? The people that think that this thing is going to become super intelligence fail to understand that this thing doesn't learn every time you prompt it. This thing is not getting smarter as you prompt it. And like context window collapse is a real thing. And like, we do not know how to solve it yet. We don't know if we will ever be able to solve it yet. And like,
I had my first context window collapse yesterday, actually. Like I've been generally pretty good about, stopping the conversation and then, moving on to a new thread or whatever. But yesterday was the first time I had my context window at 99%. And it was like, hey, you should probably start a new thread or whatever. And I spent like $10 at this point. I spent up to $10 at this point. I was like, my immediate reaction was, but I'm not done. I was like, but I'm not done. I still have more to talk about.
Oh, so you're thinking about compaction. You're thinking about the context being compacted, which is fine.
Yeah, sorry, I'm meaning it in a session way. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So when you're talking about when I'm talking about context collapsing, what I'm really talking about is like the void in the middle, where it will remember things from the beginning of the conversation and at the end of the conversation, but things in the middle it won't be able to like really remember and surface, which gets really annoying if you have I have lots of long conversations. I'm trying to get better at not doing that, but it gets really annoying because you're talking about this and it seems to understand, and then all of a sudden it will start forgetting, and you're just like, what happened? Like, we just talked about this thing and now you seem to have forgotten this thing. And it's like, a lot of that comes down to like, how do you manage that context window? And like, with an agent or with an API you're using through like an agent interface or like through a chat conversation interface, you have very little control over the context. But like, maintaining that context window is what gives you a lot of the power. But like, until you run into a lot of these problems, it's easy to think that this thing is just continually learning. Or if you don't use it heavily, it's easy to think that it's just continually learning. It's like, no, it has very, very sharp edges to what it will remember. Like, and sometimes there's just stuff that gets stuck. Like, I had one conversation about potentially using a natural language to first order logic system for evaluating fallacies within articles that I want to have as sources. Like, one of the things my research system is going to do is evaluate content to see how many rhetorical devices and fallacies it's using, and to how severe degree. Important for critical thinking or for critical reading. So I was like, oh, maybe I can use this like natural language to first order logic, and then I can use like logic tools to assess things. And it did not work very well, because it turns out that in writing, people don't use a lot of like the statements that translate well into first order logic. So I had like one conversation about this, and then I was just like, nah, I don't want to use it. But as I've gone through time, it keeps bringing this up as one of the main things that I want to do. And I'm like, I had one conversation, and the conclusion of the conversation was like, we shouldn't do this. And yet, because of how your memory's set up or whatever, this is like a main thing you think I'm going to do. Or like, I also experimented with like, maybe I'll do some fine tuning and training of my own models. And then I was like, you know what? I don't really want to do that right now. I'm fine with the models that are existing. And it's like, oh yeah, you're going to be using your 3090s to do fine tuning training. I'm like, I'm not using them for that. I'm going to use them for inference. But great that you keep remembering this one thing I told you, and you're like doing it at the expense of all of the other stuff I've told you since. And a lot of that comes from like, you got to set up your projects right. You got to set up your context right. You got to set up your history right. And that's just not something that's really exposed a whole lot by the kind of underlying by the abstractions that we're all using. So I think like we all want to be able to dig a little bit deeper. We need more levels of abstraction, more layering that we can access to do various different things. But that's not as easy as just talking to a chatbot.
Yeah. The harness question is interesting too. There's like even some of our listeners and viewers, they've been like experimenting, building their own sort of like workflow and harnesses with API calling and trying to do local models and so on and so forth. And like, we're not there yet. We haven't solved this sort of harness problem yet. Cause I primarily use like an AI agent, right? And I open it up, I tell it to do some things. I'm not doing this sort of gas towny like orchestration flow. I'm using multiple terminal tabs to do like multiple agents and whatnot. And that works well. And it's funny though, because it's not yet at the level that I would want it to be. Like, let me explain. If you and I were pair programming on something, right, which is kind of how I see AI agents to some extent. It's like a pair programming session where like you're kind of yelling at it to do something and it's doing it. But like, it doesn't know how to read context clues. For example, I tell the AI agent to modify the code to do this thing, and it generates some code, it modifies it, whatever. And then I go into the code and I look at it. I'm like, I kind of like, I tweak it a little bit, right? And I say, I'm going to change this to that and move this around, blah, blah, blah. And then I go prompt the AI again, like, okay, let's make some further changes. And then the AI agent's like, oh, I noticed that this change was reverted somehow. Let me revert it back. And I'm like, no, please, like, don't do that. I change it specifically for a reason, and
Right.
Yeah, you can say like, oh, shame on you, Matt. You should have told the AI that before, like in your next prompt, you should have said, hey, I made some manual edits and please don't overwrite them. Please understand them and then do something. Sure, I should have done that in my prompt, but also it really shows the nature of the generation aspect. It has no idea like how to like have a conversation with you. It's really just like a dog waiting for orders, right? That's all it is.
It assumes that it has full control over the world, which is what you're experiencing, right? Like I've experienced that at times too, where like I'll go do some stuff as it's doing stuff, and it's like, wait, things changed. What happened? I really need to this is like a system prompt thing too, where I need to be like, if something is different than before, first ask me if I did something.
Yeah.
And I think that would probably prompt it, like make it be like, hey, I noticed this is different. Did you change this? Or is this something else that happened?
I need to do that too. I actually have to get better with when you say system prompt, do you mean like your agents.md, like your user level one? Or do you do something deeper than that?
I mean, I'm going to have to start doing something deeper than that. But like you can actually like for Claude, probably for other ones, you can use their default system prompt, or you can give it your own, or you can append to their system prompt. So the Claude's,
but that's not via Claude.md, right? That's like a setting,
that's like an additional thing that gets fed in.
Yeah,
like your system prompt is like the first thing that gets put into the context, basically. So it's like, and that's also where like all of the tools are and all this other stuff is like usually part of the system prompt or in addition to the system prompt.
Yeah, I'll have to do more of that because I have like an agents.md, like my user level agents.md that gets like read, presumably. And I tell it basic things like, hey, use JJ instead of Git and blah, blah, blah. And I tell it things like that. And it works, but I think I have to put some more in there. But my problem is like, I like to, when I write, I like to make sure that it's written well and explained well. And that eats tokens.
Yes.
So it's like there really is a balance between, use JJ versus Git, right? Being very, very ultra concise, but also like explaining it well enough so that I can understand, like, hey, when you make changes, please prompt me to understand them, right? Yeah. Like it's, I find myself like that's a challenge for me, is understanding how much words to put into these things, that I'm not exhausting the context, but I'm also like giving the AI enough instruction that it'll do what I really want it to do.
Yeah. And like this is the challenge of these tools, is like they only have so much context that you can give them. And even if you do have a model that has a much bigger context window, there's only so much context you can put into it before things start to, as I said, like collapse, before it just starts forgetting things that are in the context. So it's like smaller context windows work better. But that also means that you have to shove more things into fewer tokens, which is like more challenging. And like it can actually help with this, right? Like for some of the projects I'm setting up, I'm like, please enter this stuff into the memory file. And it like, I think there's like a 200 character maximum or something. Maybe it's 200 word maximum to each line in the memory file, or each memory entry. So it has to like do a lot of reformatting to like get everything into memory that it wants to get into memory. So like, I think that's like, we have to do a lot more to like fine tune our context and figure out different ways to say things more concisely. I tend to be a person that uses a lot of words when I should probably be using fewer words. So it's helpful when I can just give that to the LM and be like, make this fewer words so I can put it in your context.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the same boat. And like, to some extent, I don't want to always use fewer words. Like I want to explain things deep and well enough so that not only the AI can understand it, but also the human that's going to read this can understand it too. Like there's this whole spec sort of driven development flow that people do with AI to great success, right? I'm not knocking this flow at all. You write some sort of spec and you like that spec serves as like the guiding bounds for AI to implement whatever it's implementing. So you kind of like wrap the non-determinism of AI with a deterministic spec. And it's great. But you kind of want to be a little bit more verbose in your spec because it does get nuanced in there. And you want to like explain that nuance. But then the very act of explaining that nuance means that you're wasting context, right? And
Right.
or not maybe wasting, but you're spending context. And like there's that balance there, and it's hard because I don't want to see a spec that's very like cut and dry, put period there, do this, wrap that. Like you kind of want it to still be human readable as well. But
Right.
you kind of can't sometimes if you're running out of context.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Even how you manage the context window itself is a challenge. Like there's different strategies of like doing compaction versus strategically dropping things from the context history. Dropping extended thinking from the context history is something that saves you a lot of tokens, where it's like, I don't really need to feed all of this back in. I can just, have it be dropped. Subsequent prompts don't need to see the thinking of previous ones, basically. And I think a lot of like the agents do this. I think like Claude does this automatically. Or I guess really I think Claude does thinking internally anyway. Like I don't really know how Claude specifically works, but that's definitely one of the strategies. I think also just like strategically dropping chunks of the conversation that are no longer relevant is also important. But like being able to do this means that you have to have a much lower level of access to the context and to like the API requests that are being made essentially, or like the what's being sent to the model if you're running this locally. So I think like that's where things get a bit more complicated, and like our current tooling is not geared toward us being able to do this, mostly because so much of it is structured around let's having a chat conversation instead of like I'm just reprompting this thing with more information so it has the appearance of a conversation of some sort, or so it's thinking about things. So it's I think breaking away from thinking of this as a chat conversation and seeing it as like a new sort of thing that's being done is the thing that will be helpful here.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited for us to break away from the current like chat based interface. Like we can do better than this. Like I'm trying not to use very bad words. I'm trying to be bad. I have not used an expletive.
You swear.
I know.
Actually,
but
you swore a whole bunch in the last episode. I don't know what you're talking about.
Which last? Oh yeah, the last episode.
No. Like in the one we just recorded.
Did I?
Swore like 6 or 7 times. Yeah.
Oh, I don't even count anymore. Okay, I need like a button. Where's the Staples?
I'm going to edit those out, but yeah.
Where's the Staples easy button? Swearing.
Lizard.
Yeah. I think like there's people on social media that are like, oh, the chat interface is like the best interface for AI. Oh my God, like we couldn't have designed a better interface. I'm like, dude, we only used it because it existed. Like the chat interface already existed. We already knew how to do like messages. We already have messaging apps. So why would AI companies like invent their own new like chat based or conversational based interface when they can just ride on top of the existing abstractions? So like don't sit here and say like they designed this so well. They didn't do anything. They just saw that it was there and used it as an avenue to get tokens in and out of their system, right? It was not a thought through design. And I'm like so tired of these freaking influencer preppy business freaking dudes trying to like push a narrative when they haven't even thought about the problem longer than like 2 seconds,
I mean, I will say I think it's the most obvious design, right? Because I think with other things that we've done where you're like generating an image or a video or something like that, or you're like having it rewrite text for you, like those are very one-off, non-interactive, no back and forths. But when you're talking about having a conversation with something where it's like, oh, you want to ask something, it replies, you want to ask another thing, like obviously a chat conversation is the interface that makes the most sense. And I think it is a really good interface for a lot of what people are using LLMs for. Where like you use it sort of as like really a replacement for Google, where it's like you have a question, so you just ask the question to that instead of Googling around and finding sources and trying to find an answer that way. Or you have it go do some research and return you some results, and then you can ask for more clarification and be like, oh, you did that wrong, right? It's a really good interface for that sort of stuff when you're doing it like you used to do Google searches, where it's like one-off or small, well-constrained things that you were trying to do. When you're trying to have like really large like philosophical conversations with it, or you want to like do things like code editing, or like for me like building out a research pipeline, then it makes a whole lot less sense to do it in this way, because like you do want to have much more control over context windows and the key value cache and like all this other stuff than you do by just having a conversation, right? So it's like, if the type of thing you're trying to do is conversational, then it makes sense. And I think when you say conversation, it's like, if the thing you expect to get out of it is just text, like, then it makes sense to do a conversation. But if you're trying to get code out of it, or you're trying to get analysis out of it, or like something else, then it doesn't make as much sense to have the conversational aspect to it anymore.
Right.
Or if it becomes part of a larger system, then I think the conversational interface doesn't make sense for the components. So like that's like Gastown using a conversational chatbot interface as the like lower abstraction of Gastown doesn't make nearly as much sense, because it's like that interface is built for like humans talking back and forth, not for you saying, oh, here's the thing to go do it. And it's not really built for like machine to machine LLM usage, right? Like I don't think sub-agents really use a chatty interface. I guess they sort of do, but like you can imagine a sub-agent world where like that's not how things work. And there's still, to some degree, there will always be conversation exchanges because that's how LLMs work. But I think the chat interface as we know it doesn't give you enough knobs and adjustments to be able to really utilize it in the way that you would want to for a lot of the stuff we're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say the chat interface is like a poor one or a good one. It's just the like idolizing of the AI companies. Like they designed the perfect interface. No, they didn't design anything. They used the interface they thought was best. And yes, it is good for many reasons, but also we have to recognize that there are issues. Like I was saying before about, you know, I prompted AI, made some code changes, and then I made manual changes, and then it had no idea how to reconcile it, right? Because I didn't tell it in the next prompt. That's a clear gap. Because if you and I were pair programming, right, and I said, hey, Kris, put this in the schema, blah, 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 and you did, and then I like moved my cursor, and I said, and I changed some things, and I was like, okay, you know, tweak this, tweak that. You just can observe it and be like, okay, right. I see what Matt's doing. I'll pick up from there. I wouldn't have to tell you, hey, Kris, you're watching me do this, but also I'm doing this. You know, I wouldn't have to tell you. You'd be observing it and getting it. And like AI doesn't do that yet.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not intelligent. You still have to prompt it. You still have to like tell it, hey, I made some changes out from under you. Reevaluate your state of the world and let's talk about it. It can't just do that by itself. And like that's a gap, right? That's a product gap. And we should be working on making that better, because that'll make AI feel more conversational. And I'm not saying this is like a critical thing we have to solve now. Obviously, I could have prompted it. I could have solved this myself, but should I have had to? I wouldn't have had to do that with a human, right?
Yeah. And I think too, it's like I remember like in the history of like electronic music and such, like there were early synthesizers, but they had like, you know, like knobs and other things. And then at some point, I don't remember who it was, but somebody just used a piano keyboard as the interface to a synth. And it just exploded. And like what you could do, how you could do it, became such a better interface for interacting with this technology and using this technology.
Is that how like pads were invented on like interfaces?
Pads came later. So the drum, but that came from drum machines. So that was like another thing, right? So drum machines, like having the pads, that's like, they used to be drum pads, and you have a machine that you'd have all the different parts of a drum kit on. You could just hit it with your fingers, right? So there was that interface, but like the keyboard as the synth interface was like a huge thing, because it allowed you to just play things easily. You didn't have like the kinds of problems you had before. But again, that was like a good interface for a lot of things. But if you look at more modern like audio interfaces, they are just kind of like giant drum pads, right? They are just, you know, like the Ableton Push, right? It's just like a thing with a whole bunch of, you know, pads, and they're just pressure sensitive. You can do really cool things. And it turns out that like, yeah, the keyboard was a really good interface for a long time But then we evolved the capabilities that we have, and the technology got better, and it shifted from the keyboard being the best type of interface to now this kind of drum kit being the best type of interface, because those pads are pressure sensitive. You can kind of do lots of rolling and interesting things. You can light them up in different ways, which makes it so you can tell what mode you're in. So if you're doing a live performance, you can do a quick glance and see what's happening, so you're not hitting the wrong thing. You put a bunch of knobs and like a screen around it, and all of a sudden it becomes this like kind of all-in-one portable music instrument that's also a whole lot smaller than a thing with a keyboard on it, right? Keyboards are very long, they're kind of unwieldy, whereas you can just have a drum pad thing that has even like 64 drum pads is not that big on a device. And like the interface evolved, and the types of ways we can make music and do live performances and things like that evolved as well. And I think like the chat interface is like the keyboard in that way, where like it was a thing we had before, and we had this other thing, and putting them together exploded the usefulness of this new class of thing that we have. But that, and people still buy, like, I'm not saying that people don't use like synths or really audio interfaces that use keyboard. Of course they do. But like that has led to a much more wide range of things that we have, where like I think most of the keyboards you buy these days do have some drum pads on them and have some other knobs and things and some faders and whatnot. So we've kind of mixed it all together as well. And so it's not just like one thing. You do have different ways of doing it. Like, oh, if I'm playing something, this keyboard might make sense. If I want to like bang out some beats, like the drum pads might make a little bit more sense. Or maybe I want to adjust something like an EQ or reverb or whatever. So I have those mapped to the faders that I have, right? So you have this kind of new conglomerated interface that you can use, and that enables you to make more music. And then you have the others. So there's just like a whole explosion of different types of interfaces. And I think that's what we're going to wind up having for a lot of this LLM stuff, is like we'll probably still always have the chat interface. Like that's a really good, really solid interface. But I think we're going to have a lot more interfaces and a lot more hybrid interfaces, because at the end of the day, it's going to enable people to like really do more of what they need to do in a more localized way.
Yeah, I would like to see more interfaces. I mean, like even talking to some of my colleagues, they use like Mac Whisper as their interface to talk to the LLM. Instead of typing out their prompts, they speak it. And like, yeah, you still have that like, request response sort of model there, but they can be faster. And maybe in that model, they would have prompted the AI saying, hey, AI, I'm making some changes real quick. By the way, stand by, right? Like I didn't remember to type that out, but if I was like making the changes live, I could have said that and had it like fed into the AI and told it to stand by, right? To like change its context. So just these little tweaks to your interfaces can go a long way. And it's not just like the interface itself, but it's all the configuration. That's why I used to have I know we're getting at time for break, but I used to have a weird stance of like not wanting to modify the tool from it's like how it's shipped, right? So if I was using, say, Vim, I would just use vanilla Vim, and I wouldn't do so much to like customize it past its like sort of out of the box experience. And I would do this with different tools, and I was like not afraid to use them, but I just wouldn't really use them as much in a customized way. I'd keep it vanilla. And then I realized like the power of these tools is to change them for yourself. Like they come out of the box with a certain default configuration, but it really becomes powerful for you in your workflow when you start like customizing that for yourself, when you start turning off certain default options or modifying other default options. And now like that's what I do, with JJ, with Helix, whatever. I don't just keep the default config that comes out of the box anymore. As I find sort of gaps that I don't like, I go and change the config for it. And it's really a change of mind. And it's hard to get there at first, because it really is comfortable saying like, oh, I'm going to use the tool as it was designed. But it's like, no, you got to make it work for you, because that's going to shave off time in your day to day. It's going to make you feel more comfortable using the tools, and you're just going to use the tools more often. If you have a customized tool that's for you, you want to use it more. But if you have a generic tool that kind of really doesn't fit right in the hand, you're not going to use it as much as you would. And like for me, that it took a while for me to like get over that, right? And in my career. But once I did, I really started opening up to like, wow, I can just do things, you know, I can just change whatever.
And that's the thing that I think I've kind of, where I've evolved to is like, I don't really want packaged experiences anymore. I think the way, the avenue I've kind of learned this is just from seeing how the web has evolved from having or attempting to do those more packaged experiences to switching to a system where they just give you the low level stuff and then they give you like things assembled from components of the low level stuff, but you can also just do the low level stuff yourself. Because I think for me, I want the lower level tools. I want to build the thing I want to build, and I don't want to be constrained by the packaging that thing has come in, right? That's why I do want to like drop down and start writing stuff with Zig and Llama CPP instead of, you know, using just APIs or using high level stuff, because it's like, no, I do want to tune things. I want to see how far I can push stuff, right? Because it's like, yeah, the models aren't that fast, but if I'm just batching up a bunch of work, I can have them run at like full throughput. And of course, the interface I want to use will change a whole lot, right? Like I'll have to basically design an interface that's meant for like batch work, which the chat interface, that is one of the downfalls of it, is like you expect a rapid response from it. Whereas if you have more of a batch work interface, even something, it could be something like a Kanban board style interface, another type of interface where you're like kind of looking at things, moving things around, dropping in, maybe adding some messages, right? Like an issue queue is a perfect example of this. Like people don't expect immediate responses from issue queues. So you add that type of interface on top of this other system, and now you have a much more interesting system that you can use, and you can use that to like, you know, do a lot of background work or have a lot of slow conversations over time. Where you don't need to say necessarily focus on things as hard, and you don't need to get like alerted when there's something like immediately. You just check the dashboard every, you know, couple hours. You go back, be like, oh, okay, like here to the, oh, reprioritize this, oh, do this other work, blah 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 blah. Like that seems much more interesting to me than like the chat interfaces. But you can only really explore and build those things if you drop down to the lower levels, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't do this with APIs. You can certainly do this with APIs. But like, I don't want to have to ever think again about like, how much is this thing going to cost? Right. I don't want to think about like, how many tokens am I using? It's like, I'd rather just be like, yeah, the time is the thing I'll use. It's like, how much time will this take to run? If it's going to take too much time, maybe I'll offload some of it. I'll make that decision if I need this thing right now. But in general, it's just like, here's the queue of stuff. Just work your way through it. If you don't get to the thing that I want quick enough, I'll reprioritize it. If it's still not quick enough, I'll throw it to an API. But I can do that on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't become the basis of the whole system.
Right. Interfaces.
They are important and difficult to get right.
They are. We should call it. I have one more thing to talk about. We should call it.
Oh, no, go for it.
It was funny. I was looking at an issue on the OpenAI Codex repo because Jess Frizzell, she like posted on social media about like Codex personality is annoying, right? I guess I TLDR, I believe she updated Codex. The personality was a little too, I don't know, what is it?
Sycophantic.
Yeah. Sycophantic, and not even just that, but also just like coddly. You know, it's like, you're right, Kris. That is a very good idea. We should blah blah blah. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you are correct. Like too much of that crap.
Yeah.
So she like complained about it and then wrote an issue on the Codex repo, because the Codex is one of the only agents that's like open source. Open code is too, but Codex is one of the only ones from a big company that's like open source. And it was just funny. She was just like, get this personality out of here, right? Like, just get this out of here. And evidently, like looking through the code, they used to like have a system prompt that kind of kept it at like a neutrally personality, right? Like respond very pragmatic and blah, blah, blah. And then in a newer version of the code, they actually added personalities and they set the default one to something more bubbly. And they left pragmatic as another option, but it wasn't the default. And then they switched the default to pragmatic because people were complaining. And the TLDR was like, they said that pragmatic personality that was not there in the system, like as a real personality to select, was what it was using before. Now it's just the pragmatic personality. But people were like, no, we don't want any personality. Like, just go back to what you were doing. And they added like a none personality, which is basically just don't have a personality. And I thought it was pretty funny. But like on the issue, like some OpenAI people were commenting on it, basically saying like, our users don't like no personality, and like we think this is best for them. And I'm like, this is that paternalistic crap again, you know, where show me the evidence of that, right? Show me like how you came to that conclusion, because just saying that without any evidence is that paternalistic coddling crap that people are complaining about. Like nobody wants an AI agent, or maybe people do, but like the average engineer that's using these from a coding perspective doesn't want the coddling crap of like, you are so correct, da da da. Like just give it to me straight, you know, like with no filler, please.
Yeah.
So yeah, the issue was pretty interesting to read, and they ended up actually adding like a none option. That's kind of cool.
I mean, this is the thing of like what I just mentioned earlier with Claude Code. Like you can give it your own system prompt, right? Or you can add to the system prompt. So you can just like rip that personality out. So I think the personalities are really just like additions to the system prompt. I don't know how it works with
Codex, that's what it was.
But,
it's like a template. It was like when the agent starts up, it was like a Rust like template or whatever. And if the personality was set, it would like dump it in there, right? Like it would render it in the template essentially.
Yeah. So it is fascinating how like system prompts have developed in general. Where it's just like, oh yeah, you can just tell it like you're an expert in this, and then it'll actually perform differently. It's just hilarious. But yeah, like that's another part of it that I think people don't know. Like in the web interfaces, you can't configure this. You can select like I guess you can sort of configure it via like the style. But like certainly with like Claude Code and whatnot, like you can configure the system prompt to your heart's content. And that's what gets sent up. And of course, locally, you can configure system prompt to whatever you'd like, because you know you're in full control of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that because it was pretty funny. Y'all should read it. I don't remember the issue off the top of my head, but go look at Codex's issues. Something from Jess Frizzell. Have a nice laugh.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a like funny end note of like in the episode, and pretty much all of this episode, we haven't talked about Go at all. We did not talk about Go. You're like, good. I mean, there's interesting things happening. Like at some point we got to talk. Maybe that's what we'll talk about next week. Is that
we'll talk about that proposal.
The proposal,
the method, the generic method stuff. That's a pretty. We'll talk about that next week. That's actually good because I have things to say about that.
Because I still got to read through it. I want to try processing it with some of with an LLM and start figuring out how to do that more. Because I have a much bigger project I'm working on where I'll need to process through a lot of issue queues and emails and chat messages and things like that. And this will be a good demo run. It's just so annoying how long these conversations get so quickly. You know, like all of a sudden
there's like many threads that go off the topic, and then there's many people that are like, we can't do this, we can do this, we can't do, and I fear that it's going to end up like most things in Go, just a stalemate and a defer. You know, like clearly people want to make the language better and improve it, and then there's some people that's like, no, our simplicity. And it's like, dude, do you want this language to be around in the next decade? Because if you do, you would start adding some of these features that people want. But whatever. I mean, we'll talk about it more.
I'll stake out right here. I would love if we had generic methods, even if they don't implement interfaces. I'm just
me too. Like, I don't need them to implement interface. People are like, oh, but the mocking, how will I mock? I'm like, I don't care.
How will you mock? Stop mocking.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's how you mock, right? You just don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And you design your software better. So there you go.
It's like, so you're going to block a proposal that solves the production path because you can't solve the mocking path with your interface? For real? Like, for real, dude? Anyway, we'll talk about it more next week.
Yeah, Lord. But yeah, with that's a nice little teaser of what we're going to talk about next week. So, viewer/listener, how'd you enjoy that conversation? I hope you enjoyed it a lot. Did you learn something new? I think both this and the main episode, we actually got into a lot of stuff. So I hope this was some educational. And for those of you that already know a lot, do you agree with us? Do you have your own views that are like, I think they were wrong about things X, Y, and Z? You know, let us know in the usual places. Go for Slack, Changelog Zulip, social media, or wherever you find your wonderful Fallthrough and Break host. This episode of Fallthrough, this is Break. This episode of Break featured Chris Brando and Matthew Sanabria. Break is a Fallthrough Media production and is produced by Chris Brando, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder. Complete.